Some people don't die from an accident, they die from a broken heart. And that's how many people remember Kristoff St. John. For nearly 3 decades, Kristoff St. John was a familiar presence in American living rooms. On daytime television, he embodied strength, intelligence, and quiet authority. As Neil Winters on The Young and the Restless, he wasn't portrayed as a stereotype. He was a successful businessman, a respected leader, and a reflection of dignity that many viewers, especially older audiences, rarely saw represented on screen. But while Kristoff St. John appeared steady and composed in front of the cameras, his life away from the spotlight was slowly unraveling. Behind the awards, behind the long-running role, and behind the face millions trusted, there was a father struggling with unbearable grief, a man fighting battles that fame, success, and admiration could not heal. The kind of pain that doesn't announce itself, the kind that quietly follows you home. When news of his death shocked the nation, the official reports called it an accident. Medical language tried to make sense of what happened, but to those who truly understood his journey, it felt like something far deeper had been lost long before his heart finally gave out. This is not just the story of Kristoff St. John, the television star. It is the story of grief, mental health, and what happens when a man who gave strength to millions runs out of strength for himself. So how did someone who seemed so strong for so long end up breaking in silence? Kristoff St. John was born on the 15th of July, 1966, in New York City, into a life that was complex from the very beginning. His mother was of Polish descent, his father African American. At a time when interracial families still faced open judgment and quiet rejection, Kristoff entered a world that never quite made room for him to feel fully accepted. He rarely spoke about his biological mother. According to those close to him, her family never accepted the relationship or Kristoff's black identity. As a result, his father, Kristoff St. John, raised him largely on his own before later marrying a woman named Maria, who became Kristoff's stepmother and a steady presence in his early life. Kristoff St. John was not just a parent. He was an artist, a stage actor, writer, director, and producer with deep roots in theater and film. He even appeared in the 1971 classic Shaft, a groundbreaking film for black representation in Hollywood. From an early age, Kristoff was surrounded by scripts, rehearsals, and creative conversations. Acting was not a dream planted later in life. It was the air he breathed, but childhood was far from easy. The family lived a secluded lifestyle, often in remote areas of Southern California. Kristoff later recalled feeling isolated from other children his age. While his classmates ate lunchroom food and watched cartoons, he was raised in a strict, unconventional household. His parents followed alternative lifestyles that often made him feel different, even embarrassed. He was teased, he felt hungry at school, and he learned early how to endure quietly. That quiet endurance became his strength. By the age of 7, Kristoff had already begun auditioning. His father, who faced professional setbacks of his own due to political activism and industry blacklisting, poured his focus into managing his son's career. Kristoff landed roles on television shows like That's My Mama and Happy Days, gaining early exposure to the pressures of the industry long before he fully understood them. In 1979, at just 12 years old, Kristoff portrayed a young Alex Haley in Roots, The Next Generations. It was a role that carried historical weight and emotional responsibility, especially for a black child actor. Soon after, he appeared in the Bad News Bears television series, finally finding an outlet for his love of sports, something he had been largely denied out of fear that an injury might end his acting career. As he grew older, Kristoff continued working steadily, moving between sitcoms and dramatic roles. Unlike many child actors, he did not burn out quickly or disappear. Instead, he learned discipline, patience, professionalism, traits that would later define his most iconic role. By the late 1980s, Kristoff St. John was no longer just a former child actor. He was a young man with experience, resilience, and a quiet intensity that casting directors couldn't ignore. What no one could see yet was how much of that intensity came from years of learning how to survive without ever asking for help. In 1989, Kristoff St. John stepped into the world of daytime television in a way that would quietly change its landscape. After a brief run on the soap opera Generations, he received the call that would define his career. In 1991, he joined The Young and the Restless as Neil Winters. At first, no one could have predicted what that role would become. Neil Winters was introduced as a corporate executive. He wore suits. He spoke with restraint. He carried himself with intelligence and authority. In an era when black male characters on television were often confined to narrow stereotypes, Neil Winters was something entirely different. He was educated. He was strategic. He was respected. And for many viewers, especially older black audiences, he felt revolutionary in his quiet realism. Kristoff St. John understood the responsibility immediately. He didn't play Neil as a caricature. He played him as a man navigating love, ambition, betrayal, and family inside spaces where black men were rarely allowed to exist on screen with dignity. Over time, Neil Winters became one of the longest-running African-American characters in daytime television history, and Kristoff became inseparable from the role. The impact was undeniable. Viewers tuned in not just for the drama, but for the representation. Families recognized themselves in his struggles. Fathers, sons, and husbands saw a version of black masculinity that wasn't loud or violent, but thoughtful and complex. Alongside Victoria Rao's Drusilla Winters, Kristoff formed one of the most beloved couples in soap opera history. Their chemistry drew in new audiences and helped keep The Young and the Restless at the top of daytime ratings for years. The industry took notice. Kristoff St. John earned 10 NAACP Image Awards over the course of his career, an extraordinary achievement that reflected consistent excellence rather than momentary fame. He was nominated 11 times for the Daytime Emmy Awards, winning twice. In 1992, he received the Emmy for Outstanding Younger Actor in a Drama Series. In 2008, he won again as Outstanding Supporting Actor. These honors were not handed out lightly. They were recognition of longevity, discipline, and trust. Yet despite the accolades, Kristoff never chased celebrity in the traditional sense. He continued to work steadily, appearing on shows like Living Single, Martin, The Jamie Foxx Show, and Hanging with Mr. Cooper. But The Young and the Restless remained his anchor. For nearly 30 years, he showed up day after day, bringing consistency to a genre built on emotional chaos. To millions of viewers, Kristoff St. John didn't just play Neil Winters. He became Neil Winters, and in doing so, he gave daytime television something rare. What no one could see at the height of his success was how much emotional weight he was carrying behind the scenes, because even as his career reached its peak, the foundation of his personal life was beginning to crack. In November of 2014, Kristoff St. John's life collapsed in a way no award, no role, and no amount of success could prepare him for. He lost his son. Julian St. John was only 24 years old. To the outside world, it was reported quietly. Brief headlines, short statements, but for Kristoff, it was the moment time stopped making sense. A father is never supposed to outlive his child, and when that rule is broken, something inside a person often breaks with it. Julian had struggled for years. Kristoff knew it. He had watched his son drift in and out of stability, hope, and fear. Like many parents, he believed that professional care was the safest option, that trusting the system meant protecting his child. When Julian died while under psychiatric supervision, that belief shattered. From that day forward, Kristoff didn't just grieve, he questioned everything, every decision, every signature, every moment he wasn't there. Grief turned into guilt, and guilt became a constant companion. Friends later said it was as if he replayed the same questions over and over in his mind. searching for an answer that didn't exist. The legal battle that followed only deepened the wound. Lawsuits and settlements reduced Julian's life to documents and procedures. While the case ended on paper, it never ended emotionally. There was no closure, only the haunting feeling that this loss might have been prevented. Yet every weekday, Kristoff still showed up to work. On the set of The Young and the Restless, he put on his suit. He stood under the lights. He delivered his lines as Neil Winters, the same strong, composed figure audiences had trusted for decades. Viewers saw professionalism. What they didn't see was the exhaustion behind his eyes. Those close to him noticed the change. Kristoff grew quieter. He withdrew. The laughter disappeared first, then the confidence. He spoke less about the future and more about the past. The man who once carried himself with calm authority now seemed weighed down by something invisible but heavy. Grief doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a man sitting alone long after everyone has left. Sometimes it looks like someone going through the motions of life without truly being present. Sometimes it looks like strength slowly turning into survival. Kristoff had long been open about his struggles with bipolar disorder, but after Julian's death, the balance he once fought to maintain became harder to hold. He sought help. He entered treatment. He tried to steady himself. But grief does not follow rules, and it does not respect timelines. What made Kristoff's decline so painful was not that he gave up. It was that he tried. He tried to keep working. He tried to stay connected. He tried to live in a world that no longer felt recognizable after burying his son. And each day, that effort took more from him than the day before. By the time the public realized how deeply Kristoff St. John was hurting, the damage had already been done. The loss of Julian had changed him in ways that fame could not shield and love could not repair. The strongest man in the room was quietly running out of strength. By early 2019, those closest to Kristoff St. John knew he was no longer just grieving. He was exhausted. Years of carrying unprocessed loss had worn him down. The death of his son had not faded with time. If anything, it had grown heavier. Friends and family described him as emotionally drained, struggling to regain balance, and searching for a sense of peace that never seemed to arrive. On the 3rd of February 2019, Kristoff St. John was found unresponsive in his home in California. The news spread quickly. Fans were stunned. Co-stars were heartbroken. For many viewers who had watched him for decades, it felt personal, like losing someone they had known their entire adult lives. The official coroner's report later ruled his death an accident. According to medical findings, Kristoff suffered from hypertrophic heart disease, a condition that thickens the heart muscle and can interfere with normal function. Alcohol was listed as a contributing factor. There was no dramatic scene, no public spectacle, just a quiet ending to a life that had already been under immense emotional strain for years. But for many Americans, that explanation felt incomplete, because while the report described how his heart stopped, it did not explain why his life had become so heavy to carry. Kristoff St. John's death forced the public to confront an uncomfortable truth. Grief does not always look the way people expect it to. It doesn't always arrive as visible despair. Sometimes it arrives as prolonged exhaustion. Sometimes it hides behind professionalism, routine, and the appearance of stability. In the United States, particularly within Black and Latino communities, Kristoff's story sparked renewed conversations about mental health, about how strength is often defined as silence, about how generations were taught to push through pain rather than process it. His life became a mirror reflecting how easily grief can be misunderstood, minimized, or left untreated. Media coverage followed a familiar divide. Some outlets focused on medical terminology and official statements. Others focused on the emotional truth. Many families recognized immediately that losing a child can alter a parent's entire sense of reality, permanently. Talk shows, opinion pieces, and social media discussions all circled the same question. How many people are quietly struggling long after the world assumes they should have moved on? Internationally, the reaction was no different. The Young and the Restless had been watched far beyond American borders. Fans across countries mourned the loss of a man who had represented calm authority and dignity on screen. His passing reminded audiences everywhere that fame does not protect the human heart, and success does not shield anyone from profound emotional pain. In the years since his death, Kristoff St. John's story has continued to resurface, not as gossip, but as reflection. Documentaries, tributes, and retrospectives have reframed his legacy through a wider lens, not just as an actor who played a powerful role, but as a man whose life revealed how urgently society needs to understand grief, support mental health, and recognize that some wounds do not heal simply because time passes. Kristoff St. John was laid to rest beside his son. That detail alone says more than any headline ever could. A father and a child reunited in silence after years of pain that never truly found relief. For many who followed his story, that image became the final chapter, quiet, heavy, and deeply human. To the public record, Kristoff St. John's death was ruled an accident. Medical terms explain what happened to his heart. Reports listed contributing factors. But for those who watched his life unfold, it never felt that simple, because his passing did not begin on that final day. It began years earlier, when grief entered his life and never left. And yet, Kristoff's story is not only one of loss, it is also a story of legacy. For nearly 30 years, he brought Neil Winters into American homes, day after day. He gave viewers a black male character defined by intelligence, restraint, and emotional depth, at a time when such representation was rare. Older audiences didn't just watch Neil Winters, they trusted him. They recognized parts of themselves in him. Kristoff St. John helped reshape what dignity looked like on daytime television. That contribution cannot be erased by tragedy. If anything, his life reminds us that strength on the outside does not cancel pain on the inside, that success does not make someone immune to grief, and that mental health is not a private issue, it is a shared responsibility, one that families, communities, and systems must take seriously. Today, Kristoff St. John is remembered not only through reruns and awards, but through the conversations his story continues to spark. Conversations about how we support parents who lose children, about how long grief really lasts, about how many people around us may be quietly struggling long after the world expects them to be okay. His legacy lives in more than a role. It lives in awareness. It lives in empathy. It lives in the reminder that asking for help is not weakness, it is survival. And perhaps the most important thing Kristoff St. John leaves behind is this truth. Some of the strongest people we admire are carrying the heaviest burdens. If this story moved you or reminded you of someone you've lost, take a moment, share their name, share their story. And if you're watching this while carrying your own grief, know that you are not alone and you do not have to carry it in silence.